the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Welcome to Spectra7's presentation at the SNN Canada event. Let me first remind you that our presentation today is provided under our cautionary notes, which can be seen on the second slide of our investor presentation, as well as on our website. Let me first introduce Spectra7. Spectra7 is a high-performance analog semiconductor or chip company based in San Jose, California, i.e. Silicon Valley. The company was incorporated 11 years ago, quite soon to be 12 years, and is the leader in a new class of connectivity semiconductors, in particular, as we will talk about, active copper cabling. We are the leader in this segment, where our devices are embedded within either end of a copper cable, specifically within the connector of such a copper cable, performing some very important innovative functions to enable that historically very simple and low-cost copper connector medium to transport much higher speed data at a lower power than alternatives. We'll talk in a couple of slides to Spectra7's history in this space, but let me just point out that Spectra7 is addressing a variety of very rich, high-growth end markets and enjoys a strong base of Tier 1 end customers. Examples are shown on the bottom right of our slide here, both within the data center space, within the consumer market, and certainly directly with copper cable assemblers who take our device, our chip in other words, and embed it within a finished copper cable harness. So Spectra7 is the chip provider to copper cable harness manufacturers. And where we're coming from is a very rich, historically growing opportunity within the consumer space. The company's roots are in HDMI, USB, and over time also augmented and virtual reality copper cables that have required very thin copper dimensions, easy to handle, light copper cables that also, by the way, carry high-speed data. That is where Spectra7 developed its intellectual property base that is now protected by 55 patents, hardened the technology, deployed it, very customers such as Facebook Oculus, Monster Cable, many HDMI cable manufacturers as well. And over the past 5 years, we have now built on that very rich IP and customer base to pivot into a much larger and higher margin market, namely the data center interconnect space. And we will talk today extensively about our progress as well as our revenue growth within the data center market specifically. Importantly, we have three adjacencies where this class of ultra-thin, ultra-light active copper cables are also extremely relevant that we expect to grow into over time. Electric vehicles in general, the automotive market, but particularly EVs, are a very rich application for this same class of active copper cables, as are switching systems themselves. But within the 5G infrastructure, where mobile operators require low-cost, 10 to 20 meter length copper cables that sit in an outside environment, this technology is also being rapidly adopted. We, in fact, have announced that we have a very important design win with one of the two large North American operators who are known to be AT&T and Verizon. So today we have rapidly evolved into the data center, are clearly inflecting and growing rapidly within that space. But we see these three very attractive adjacencies where we'll also be expanding our footprint over time. Then what I want to talk about next is why you should look at Spectra7 as a very attractive investment proposition. Not only are we highly differentiated within multiple high-growth end markets, but also we are clearly protected and differentiated by our intellectual property, 55 issued patents already. We have a strong tailwind of revenue growth behind us. As we now have reported, we have over 90 design wins. These are all with very large end data center operators. Those design wins are now moving into production. 6 of them are in production with the vast majority on their way, driving very significant revenue growth going into 2022 and beyond. And we see the benefit of that already in our revenue trajectory. We have been roughly doubling every quarter this year of 2021 and expect to double in this fourth quarter sequentially over Q3 based on our guidance of $2.5 to $3.5 million of revenue, midpoint obviously being at $3 million. We expect, in fact, that for the year, revenues are going to be up somewhere between 400 and 500% over 2020. Expect again to be exiting the year at roughly the midpoint of our guidance, $3 million, and to achieve positive EBITDA performance in this fourth quarter of 2021. And last but far from least, when we started this fourth quarter, early October, as we pre-announced, record order backlog on the books of roughly $7.2 million in early October. That has now grown substantially as we've worked our way through the quarter with 2 months behind us now. So it's grown even more since that $7.2 million that we pre-announced early Q4. Okay, now let me talk to you about the opportunity within the data center infrastructure specifically. Historically, the data center operators have had basically two options to interconnect equipment within these enormous hyperscale infrastructures. One is clearly plain old, simple, passive copper, and that has been and still remains the predominance of interconnects within a data center. The second is optics or fiber optic interconnects. Those have grown rapidly because data rates have grown, and as data rates have increased, it's become more and more difficult to address the interconnects with passive copper because at higher speeds or higher data rates, as they're known, passive copper has all kinds of loss characteristics that limit the reach or the length of the usable copper cable as you move up in speed. Spectra7 is bringing to the market a whole new alternative, namely active copper cabling, which I'll talk to in a minute, but the value proposition of ACC or active copper cables increases dramatically as data rates go up. In fact, we expect that as you get to 800 gigabits per second, generally defined as 8 conductors each carrying 100 gigabit Ethernet, that at least half or more of interconnects within hyperscale data center infrastructure will be in this new category of active copper cable that today Spectra7 dominates. So we believe that although the market's growing overall, we do believe that fiber optic interconnects will also continue to grow with it. Without any doubt in our minds, active copper cabling will clearly eclipse all the other connectivity means and is going to be the highest growth rate, will reach very significant market size over the course of the next 3 or 4 years. Now let me compare and contrast this technology to the other two alternatives I mentioned briefly, namely passive copper and active or fiber optic active optical cables. Passive copper is clearly the predominant interconnect means historically, or has been. It has benefits such as it's obviously no power consumption. It's a simple passive conductor. It's ubiquitous. It's low cost because you can purchase copper universally from many low-cost sources. And it can address cabling up to maybe a couple of meters or so, 1 to 2 meters in length as you go up in speed. The trade-offs with it are at high data rates, 400 gig, 800 gig especially, the reach or length of cable you can reach is limited to roughly a couple of meters or less. Also, to achieve those lengths, just to get up to a couple of meters, the thickness, sometimes known as gauge of the copper cable, increases dramatically and makes the bundle or passive cable bundle, as is shown in the picture here, very bulky, very difficult to bend, route, connect, and within data centers that clearly benefit from air cooling as well, very thick cabling blocks airflow, and that's another problem with passive copper cables. Because of the limitations of passive copper, operators over the past 15 years or so have started adopting the only alternative to date, which was optical cable. Now, fiber optic cables are certainly an excellent medium or conductor to transport high-speed data. There's very little loss, and you can reach lengths of many kilometers. In fact, submarine cables can carry information hundreds of kilometers. The trade-off is that fiber cables are very expensive, and also you have to perform electro-optical conversion on either end of fiber, and that costs a lot of power. So the benefits are very high fidelity in transport of high data rates, but the trade-offs are cost and power. Whereas active copper cable, that is now this new category that Spectra7 has brought to the market, really solves many of the problems that passive cable has suffered from for many years. And by boosting and compensating for the copper loss, we're able to enjoy lengths up to 7 meters, in some cases even 9 or even 10 meters of length, at a fraction of the cost of a fiber optic cable and a fraction of the power consumption, which is critical, as I'll talk to in a couple of slides. So it's a very important, really transformative new interconnect technology within data centers, one that brings copper forward with all the benefits of low cost and extremely low power to cover the majority, roughly 90% of the cabling requirements within the data center. Our focus for many years now has been to bring this new category of active copper cabling to hyperscalers globally. The big 9 are shown here in China. They're known as the BATs, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, North America, G-Mafia, Google, Microsoft, etc. Those 9 represent a very, very large end market and are growing very rapidly. And in fact, you'd see in the first quarter of 2021, CapEx was up 31% over the prior year. So it's an enormous and also very high growth market. So really a tremendously attractive space for Spectra7. And here I'd like to talk briefly about the benefits of this technology as seen from a hyperscaler's perspective. This is taking specific numbers from a case study that we worked on with a North American hyperscaler data center operator. They save 2 ways. They save upfront in outfitting their data centers with active copper cables versus optical, and they save in their operational expenditures on a recurring basis due to the savings in their power bill. You would see that they save roughly $18 million in CapEx costs per year. This is per data center. And also, versus optical, they save up to $20 million a year. Again, $20 million a year in the power bill per hyperscale data center, which is generally defined as 100,000 servers or so. So it is the case that hyperscale operators save both ways. They save as they build out their infrastructure, and they save on a recurring basis in their power bill. We've been at this now for about 5 years, entering the market in 2017, and have started scoring in late 2017 and over the past 4 years or so, a large swath of design wins in the industry, total of 95 as of the last reported quarter, which was Q3 of this year. Of the 95, roughly 6 are in production now, and roughly 89, so obviously the vast majority of these are on their way to production over the course of the next couple of years. Our end customers, namely hyperscale data center operators, are very excited about this technology. They're adopting it, they're testing it, they're so-called qualifying it and getting it ready for volume production. 6 are now in production, already driving record order backlog for Spectra7, another 89 on their way. Notably, just over a third of these are in China and just under 2/3 are in North America. So very well-diversified and rich design and pipeline. Now let me size the opportunity for you a little bit. While we believe that optical or fiber optic interconnects will continue to grow at roughly a 15% CAGR, we believe that active copper cabling electronics will grow at an explosive rate of roughly 70%, 70, compounded annual growth rate, to cross over roughly $400 million over the course of the next 4 years. Clearly a very attractive market and representing probably one of the highest growth as well as one of the largest market segments in the semiconductor industry. We're very excited to be a leader here and today be capturing 100% of the design win opportunities in the industry. A couple of financial highlights. So Spectra7 is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange Ventures and also trades on OTCQB under symbol SPVNF. Our share price is now a little over $2 Canadian. Our market cap is a little higher than 65 million Canadian, or a little over 50 million USD. So still micro cap, but I believe well on our way to becoming a much larger company with much higher valuation over the course of the next couple of years. Trailing 12 months revenues as of the end of Q3 were $3.8 million. As I mentioned, our backlog just starting Q4 was 7.2, so almost twice that much. Trailing 12 months gross margin of 56%. Insiders, being myself and the rest of the board, are long-term believers in Spectra7, have been buying in almost every single private placement and collectively hold about 13.4% of the outstanding shares. There's a convertible note on our balance sheet that is due in July of next year, of 2022. It started at 15.5 million Canadian. A chunk of it has converted, and we paid off some of it. The balance today is 8.2 million Canadian, and there are 32.4 million shares outstanding. So as we look forward to the long term, driven by a strong tailwind of these design wins that we have been capturing over the past 5 years, we expect to grow at a CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, that is, of at least 60%, that is 60. We expect our margin to blend up to gross margin level between 60 and 65% as the mix of data center product increases, and ultimately arrive at roughly 25 to 30% EBITDA margins. Very attractive long-term operating model. So just to recap, Spectra7 is in one of the most exciting, highest gross margin markets in the industry, namely data center interconnects. We are also in a variety of consumer markets, which we dominate today. For instance, tethered solutions for augmented and virtual reality, HDMI, active copper cables, and so forth. We're clearly highly differentiated by our intellectual property and know-how in this active copper cable segment, and we are proven. We're today in high volume deployments being adopted broadly by not only consumer companies, but also data center operators and end customers, backed by a very rich patent portfolio. So thank you for attending our presentation. Look forward to our one-on-ones. Have a good day.